I now call to order this meeting of the Old Gray-Haired Men's Club. Here, here. Not going to talk about politics. I'm going to talk about fun stuff. Just random play. Now, I recently saw, this was mind-blowing, this video on the tubes. It was entitled "An Astrophysicist Talks About Alien Life," or something very close to that. There will be a link to that video in the description, so click on it. The whole thing was fascinating, but the first part especially was absolutely mind-blowing. Well, there's a certain formulae that you take. First of all, you figure out how many galaxies there are in the universe. Then you figure out, the best you can, how many stars are in the galaxies, and then multiply it out. How many stars are in the universe. Then you figure out how many stars are of the correct size to promote a long enough span of time in which to develop intelligent life. In our case, it's questionable. And then it goes on to how many planets, because it's natural occurrence to have satellites around large bodies. During the formation, there's junk that gets spewed out. They collect together. You get the drift. How many of those planets would be in the Goldilocks zone? And then you can deduce a possible number of alien life formed planets. But the part of that really blew my mind was the scope of the universe, because they had, I believe Australian, Pagan Pride, she's one of yours, one of your kinsmen, had this small spot, and it's small when you consider the whole 360-degree sphere type of thing. The small space where the Hubble Space Telescope was aimed at a dark section, very long exposure, I think it was 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, all you saw, it was like looking at a galaxy. The number of these little light spots there, which were not planets, they filtered out, I think, 6 of our stars in the Milky Way. All these things, aside from those 6 stars in our own galaxy, and it showed up in the frame, all those were galaxies. And you can see, you can imagine, you can have your mind blown by those specks out there, how far away they were. And the distances, the sheer size, it makes us feel very small, which in some ways can be comforting. Other ways it terrifies people and upsets them. But in my case, and possibly yours, possibly, just the awe, the sheer awe of the size of the universe. And then the number, oh my gosh, the number of galaxies when they then expand it throughout the whole sphere. And then the number of stars in those galaxies, the numbers are mind-numbing. And then it gets into, I'm not gonna have a spoiler and tell you how many, possible planets there are in the universe with intelligent life, but it was magnificent. So let's talk about UFOs. I'm going to talk about some paranormal type of experiences I've had. Why not? I'm 60, you all know that. I don't care anymore. I'm going to throw it all out there. Fort Sill, Lawton, Oklahoma in the 80s. Basic training. I know if you've been in the military, you get sick of basic training stories, but it's the only time I had like this experience with UFOs. And so I was shaken from my bed, my wonderful probably 2 hours of sleep, by a whole group of drill sergeants. That's always pleasant. And they point up in the sky after asking me, "You went to college, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I went to college." So they're like, "What are those?" And what we were all looking at was this flight, this group, fingertips are the group, of lighted objects that would go from one side of the sky, quite a bit of angular distance, at a high rate of speed, and then stop dead. I mean, just stop dead, and then reverse course, and then go off in a different direction. And not airplanes, not anything that I can think of. What in the world? Not any kind of comet or anything. So I just told them, "Drill sergeants, those are UFOs. Can I go back to bed? May I be relieved?" DS. The second one was a more personal nature. David Haynes and I, a friend of mine, were camping in the mountains, Colorado. No population center near. We're out camping in the mountains, in the wilderness, the vast wilderness. And we're laying on the ground in our sleeping bags. Didn't have a tent. Why not? It's not that cold. We have good sleeping bags. And we're looking up, and there's this triangular object. It looked like one of those Star Wars things. Whatever, you know, the triangle ones. Flying low over us. I mean, a matter of a couple hundred yards or so. It was massive, and it was slow. I could not envision, unless it was filled with helium, how this thing could remain airborne because of the amazingly slow speed of it, just kind of drifting over like 30-40 miles an hour, my estimate. Low, no source of lift, no rotors, no downward jets like a Harrier or anything like that. It was just over us with this purple lights going around the perimeter. And I looked at David, and David looked at me, and we both kind of, at one time, and then the next, you didn't see that, did you? And Dave was like, no, I didn't see that. And we never talked about it again. Okay, now, I discussed my experience with UFOs. You know, just unexplained flying objects. I'm not saying they're aliens, but I'm saying they're aliens. Next is ghosts. Now, my wife and I live in an area that this spot, we've seen some stuff. Our visitors at sunset have seen some stuff. But I'm not going to discuss that. I'm going to talk about the old Jackson prison. The old Jackson prison, before they stopped it, they didn't tear it down, they used it for various things, and now it's an artist community with apartments. Old school, big stone fortress looking thing. And we roamed around without permission, the basement, the belly of the beast. And when they talk about burying people under the prison, this is what it was. Dungeon cells, 4 feet high by 4 feet by 4 feet, with iron bars, and it was said that they would beat the prisoners if they made sounds. And so you can see, if there ever would be a haunted place, this would be it. But I went from Camp Grayling. This is when I was in this transportation unit in the National Guard. I was in a couple different services. Went from Camp Grayling to Jackson and spent the night in the armory on the 4th floor, the old prison. And it was one of these big open bay things, you know, with the bunks, the lines of the bunk beds, the racks, as we call it in our vernacular. And went from the ground floor to the 1st floor. I'm hearing singing, like old time singing, like antique singing, and banging on things, like metal on metal. NBC, put your mop gear on. Banging and singing, old time singing. Could not reproduce it. It's not like something I can pull up on YouTube. Ground, 1st floor. And then it continued up the staircase, and the stairwell was open off to my right, laying there listening to this. 1st floor to 2nd floor. Then 2nd floor to 3rd floor. Still singing and banging, getting louder and louder. But between the 3rd floor and the 4th floor, I fell asleep. And I was tired, and it wasn't like there's ghosts coming at me. In my mind, it created like the rest of the guys from the unit were walking up the stairs and banging on stuff. They were drunk, which happens. So I fell asleep. Next morning, I wake up, I look around, there's nobody there. I go downstairs, the 1st sergeant, top. I've always liked 1st sergeants. I can't say I ever liked a captain. But the 1st sergeants, I understood them because they were actually the working class. If you're a captain, whatever. Asked the 1st sergeant, where'd all those guys go that were coming up to the bay last night? And he's going, what are you talking about? We were the only ones here. Ghost stories. Okay, Bigfoot stories, and this kind of explains how I was able to fall asleep in some respects. When I was doing John the Survivalist, Roosevelt National Forest, I had this system camping, I had this really cool little mesh hammock and a sleeping bag. I'd just roll it up and tie it with this like clothesline, more or less, hang it over my back. I had a poncho that I'd used as a rain fly. I'd used a rope for my sleeping bag, just two sides, and then the crossing, you know, so it's a wonderful setup. But I was in this area where grizzly bear lived, and also this one-eyed cougar. He had lost his eye. And so here I am, fresh meat hanging from a hammock in this area with these two large predators. And it took me about a week before I was able to fall asleep. And then I made this realization, if they're gonna get me, they're gonna get me. I'm not gonna worry about it. You know, I'm gonna get my sleep. What time is it? It's time to sleep. And so I got to this point in my life where it's like, if something bad is going to happen, it's going to be bad, but I'm not going to miss sleep because I love sleep when I need it. Which leads into number 4. I've discussed aliens, ghosts. No, this is number 3. Now Bigfoot. Again, Roosevelt National Forest. And I moved from my hammock camping to a more elegant type of abode. Behind me there's a big fire ring. I spent a lot of time, it was a major fire ring, but on the other side of the fire ring from the hammock, 2 trees, fire ring, and then back wall will be this cliff. There was kind of a divot in it, like this opening, and so I built this like cabin-like front with a nice door, and I wound up sleeping in a more secure place. And even though bears or whatever could rip that off if they wanted to, sleeping in that. Well, I had my backpack up about 15 feet up in a tree, or a bag, just a bag that I had at this point in time because I was there for a couple months. A bag hanging up with some food in it. Well, one morning I wake up and they didn't untie the rope, they didn't do anything. They were able to knock that thing down. There were giant claw marks and the bag was empty. It's like, yay, I'm glad I'm sleeping in my little divot thing there. Whatever it is didn't get me, it just got my food. Well, for a period of time afterwards, I would hear walking around the front of my cave abode something bipedal. And you can tell the difference, if you're clever, between something on 4 feet and 2 feet. This was a large, heavy 2-footed creature. Boom, boom, different meter, like half that. Boom, walking out there. And I remember I'd run out there, and I upped my technology. I had a flashlight at this point, procured a flashlight. Would run out there and run around trying to see what it was walking around. Never did. Never had any trace of that. And it was rocky. It was a rocky kind of surface out there, so I didn't pick up any footprints. Yeah, so there we go. In a nutshell, aliens, ghosts, and Bigfoot. I've seen it all. I've done it all. Have a good one. Thank you for listening. And you know, I'm curious. It's not like anybody in great numbers watches my videos. Feel free to put down some of your experiences that are unknown. You shan't be judged. That's all. Closing this meeting of the Gray-Haired Old Men's Club.